The collision happened in less than a second. Jack's small trading vessel shattered like glass against the research ship's hull, scattering debris across the orange atmosphere of planet DX-249. Warning lights flashed inside his cockpit as the ship's computer announced multiple system failures. Through the spinning wreckage, he caught a glimpse of another escape pod launching from the research vessel before his own pod's automatic systems activated. Emergency protocols engage. Brace for atmospheric entry. The computer's calm voice contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. Jack grabbed the safety harness, his knuckles white beneath his suit's gloves. The pod shot away from his dying ship, plunging toward the planet's surface. 10 kilometers away, Vex experienced the same terror. The slim, gray-skinned alien scientist pulled herself tighter into her acceleration couch as her escape pod rattled violently. Her large, dark eyes tracked the entry trajectory on the pod's displays, calculating their chances of survival. The numbers weren't good. Both pods streaked through the orange sky like falling stars, leaving trails of superheated plasma in their wake. Jack's pod hit the thicker atmosphere first, its heat shield straining against the intense friction. He grunted as the G-forces pressed him hard into his seat. The pod's internal temperature rose despite its cooling systems working at maximum capacity. Warning: landing zone contains crystalline formations. Adjusting trajectory. The computer fought to find a safe landing spot among the jagged crystal forests that covered the planet's surface. Vex's pod took a different path, angling toward a relatively flat expanse of metallic sand. Her four-fingered hand danced across the control panel, manually adjusting the pod's descent. Years of scientific training helped her stay focused, even as the pod shook so hard her teeth rattled in her elongated skull. Jack's pod struck first. The impact sent him slamming against his restraints as the pod bounced and skidded across the crystal field. Sharp formations scraped against the hull with a sound like screaming metal. When the pod finally stopped, it lay tilted on its side, half buried in glittering crystal shards. For several moments, Jack hung in his harness, just breathing. He was alive. That was step one. The pod's systems began their automated checks, and his heart sank as the damage reports rolled in. Life support systems compromised. Oxygen recycler operating at 47% capacity. Estimated functional duration: 38 hours. Well, that's just perfect, Jack muttered, unstrapping himself. He checked his suit's seals, all intact, thankfully. The external cameras showed him a landscape that looked like something from a fever dream. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground at odd angles, their surfaces reflecting the light from the system's twin suns. The atmosphere was a toxic soup of gases that would kill him in seconds without his suit. Several kilometers away, Vex's pod made a smoother landing on the metallic sand plain. But her relief was short-lived. As soon as the pod settled, warning indicators lit up her control panel. Thermal regulation system critically damaged, her pod's computer announced in the flowing language of her people. Current external temperature: 82 degrees above survivable range. Suit thermal protection failing. Vex felt the heat already building in her environment suit. Her species had evolved on a much cooler world, and without proper thermal regulation, she would cook inside her own suit within hours. She needed help, and quickly. Both survivors took stock of their situations. Jack checked his emergency beacon, damaged in the landing. His communicator picked up no signals on any frequency. Through the pod's canopy, he could see one of the research ship's fragments burning up in the atmosphere, leaving a bright trail across the orange sky. Vex's sensors detected the other pod's impact site, but the crystalline formations were interfering with detailed scans. She knew her only hope lay in finding the other survivor. Her species had encountered humans before, though contact had been limited. She knew they were resilient, adaptable, and most importantly, they had a reputation for helping those in need. The planet's twin suns cast double shadows across the deadly landscape as both survivors prepared to leave their pods. Neither knew that their only chance of survival lay in finding each other, or that their meeting would change the relationship between their species forever. Somewhere in the crystal forests between them, something stirred, attracted by the commotion of their landing. The trials of DX-249 were about to begin. Jack moved carefully through the crystal forest, each step calculated. His suit's oxygen meter ticked down steadily, 35 hours remaining. The broken shards of crystal beneath his boots crunched like walking on glass. He held his emergency tracker in one hand, following the faint signal from the alien pod's crash site. The twin suns made everything twice as challenging. Two shadows danced around his feet, and the crystals reflected light in confusing patterns that played tricks on his eyes. His military training kept him moving forward, marking his path with small electronic beacons every 100 meters. If I were a scared alien scientist, he muttered to himself, where would I go? Meanwhile, Vex was struggling with her own journey. The heat in her suit kept rising, forcing her to rest in the shadows of larger crystals every few minutes. She left behind small hovering markers that glowed with a soft blue light, standard meridian emergency signals. Her long fingers trembled slightly as she placed each one, her body already feeling the effects of the rising temperature. The first sign of the coming storm was a low humming sound. Jack noticed it first, a vibration that made the crystal formations sing like wet fingers on glass. He looked up to see clouds of crystalline dust approaching, sparkling ominously in the double sunlight. Vex saw it too. Her scientific training told her exactly how dangerous crystal dust storms could be. The tiny shards could work their way into suit seams and shred breathing equipment. She needed shelter, fast. They both ran for the same cave. Jack reached the opening first, ducking into the natural crystal formation just as the storm hit. He switched on his suit lights and froze. He wasn't alone. In the back of the cave, a tall, slim figure in a sleek environment suit stood equally still. Time seemed to stop as human and alien stared at each other. Vex's large eyes blinked behind her faceplate, while Jack's hand instinctively moved toward the emergency tool on his belt. The storm raged outside, forcing them to stay put. Jack noticed the alien suit had different markings than he'd seen in briefings about other species. The scientist, he was pretty sure it was a scientist from the equipment she carried, made no aggressive moves. Vex broke the silence first, raising her hand slowly and speaking into her suit's translator. Peace. Help needed. The words came out rough but understandable in human English. Jack relaxed slightly, showing his empty hands. My oxygen recycler is damaged, he said slowly, pointing to his suit systems. Vex's translator worked on his words. She pointed to her own suit and made a gesture like wiping sweat from her forehead. Temperature control failing. Their suit computers connected, sharing status data. Jack's eyes widened as he saw the alien's suit temperature, dangerously high for her species. At the same time, Vex noticed his dropping oxygen levels. A strange coincidence became clear. Jack's suit had a backup cooling system he wasn't using, while Vex's suit had an extra oxygen recycler that she didn't need for her different biology. But their systems weren't compatible, unless they worked together. Look, Jack said, pointing to the readings. Your suit can cool both of us. My suit can clean air for both of us. Vex understood. She made a walking motion with her fingers, then held them close together. Must stay near. They ran tests and found the critical distance, 10 meters. Any further apart, and their suit systems couldn't share resources properly. They were now literally bound together to survive. The storm passed after an hour, leaving behind a changed landscape dusted with tiny crystals. Jack and Vex emerged from the cave as reluctant partners, their suits linked by necessity and their lives dependent on each other. My ship, Vex said through her translator, pointing in the direction she'd come from, has emergency beacon. Still working maybe. Jack nodded. Lead the way. I'll watch our backs. He checked his own suit readings, now stable thanks to Vex's systems. They had a chance if they worked together. As they started walking, keeping close to maintain their suit connections. Neither of them noticed the unusual tracks in the crystal dust behind their cave. Something had been waiting out the storm too, something that was now following their combined heat signature with great interest. The real challenges of DX-249 were just beginning. The twin suns were setting, casting long double shadows across the crystalline landscape. Jack and Vex had been walking for 6 hours, staying within their critical 10-meter range. Their linked suit systems hummed quietly, keeping them both alive in the hostile environment. "How far to your ship?" Jack asked, his words being translated by their connected systems. He was scanning the horizon, a habit from his military days. Something about this planet made his instincts scream danger. Vex checked her instruments. 20 kilometers, she replied. Her translator made her musical language sound flat in English, but path not straight. Many obstacles. They had to climb over fallen crystal formations and circle around deep cracks in the ground. The planet's surface was like a broken mirror, with sharp edges everywhere. Their suits were tough, but one wrong move could tear them open. Jack noticed it first, the way some of the crystals seemed to move when they weren't looking directly at them. He held up his hand, signaling Vex to stop. Years of combat training had taught him to trust his gut. "We're being followed," he whispered. Vex's large eyes widened behind her faceplate. She pulled out a small scanner from her belt. "Life signs," she confirmed. 4 creatures, moving in circle pattern around us. They stood back to back, their suits maintaining their life-saving connection. In the growing darkness, they could see shapes moving between the crystal formations. The creatures were hard to spot. Their bodies seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as their surroundings. "Crystal predators," Vex said, her voice tense. "Attracted to heat signatures. Our suits are like a dinner bell," Jack finished. He looked around quickly. "We need higher ground." They moved carefully toward a tall crystal formation, keeping their eyes on the shifting shapes around them. The creatures were getting closer, becoming bolder. In the fading light, Jack could see they were about the size of large earth wolves, but their bodies were angular, with faceted surfaces that reflected light in confusing patterns. Vex studied their movements through her scanner. "They hunt in pack, try to separate prey." She pointed to how the creatures were moving. "Will attack from multiple directions." Jack nodded, his military experience kicking in. "They're trying to force us apart, but we can't separate. Our suits won't work if we're too far from each other." The first creature attacked without warning, leaping from behind a crystal formation. Its body sparkled in the dim light as it lunged toward them. Jack reacted instantly, pushing Vex aside while staying within range. The creature's crystalline claws scraped against his suit's armored shoulder. "The light," Vex shouted suddenly. "They use crystals to communicate. Watch reflection patterns." Jack saw what she meant. Before each attack, the creatures reflected light signals to each other. It was like they were using the crystal formations as a natural communication network. Vex quickly adjusted her suit's external lights, creating a bright, irregular pattern. The creatures hesitated, their own light signals becoming confused. "Smart thinking," Jack said, grabbing her arm. "Now run." They sprinted toward the crystal formation, staying close enough for their suits to work. The creatures followed, but Vex's light trick had disrupted their coordination. Instead of attacking as a group, they were now moving individually, unsure. Jack and Vex reached the formation and began to climb. The crystal surface was rough enough to provide handholds, and Jack's climbing experience helped guide them both up. The creatures tried to follow but couldn't coordinate their attacks on the vertical surface. From their higher position, they could see the creatures clearly now. Their bodies were beautiful but deadly, like moving shards of crystal. After several failed attempts to reach them, the pack retreated, their light signals fading into the darkness. "That was too close," Jack said, checking their suit systems. The brief fight had used up some of their shared resources, but they were still within safe levels. Vex was already studying the data from her scanner. "They will return," But now we know their patterns. We can be ready. Jack looked at the long journey ahead of them. We need to move faster. Those things aren't the only danger out here, I bet. Vex nodded, her alien features showing what Jack recognized as determination. We learn, we adapt, we survive. Together, they began planning their next move. The crystal predators had taught them an important lesson. On this deadly planet, only by combining their different skills and knowledge would they have a chance to stay alive. The ground disappeared in front of them without warning. Jack and Vex stood at the edge of a massive crack in the planet's surface, stretching as far as they could see in both directions. The chasm was at least 50 meters wide, with walls of jagged crystal dropping into darkness below. This isn't on any of my maps, Vex said, checking her devices. Steam rose from vents along the chasm walls, carrying the planet's toxic atmosphere in swirling clouds. Jack knelt to examine the edge. Looks fresh. Maybe the crash triggered some kind of geological event. He picked up a crystal shard and dropped it into the chasm. Several seconds passed before they heard it hit something. That's deep. Vex's scanner beeped warnings. Toxic geysers below. Very irregular pattern. And she paused, adjusting her scanner. There. Look. She pointed to what seemed like natural crystal bridges spanning the chasm at various points. Those don't look very stable, Jack said, studying the nearest bridge. It was about 20 meters away, a thin span of crystalline material that glinted dangerously in the double sunlight. No choice, Vex replied. Going around would take days. Our suits cannot last that long. She was right. Their shared life support systems were working, but they weren't meant for extended use. They had maybe 18 hours left before critical failure. They made their way carefully to the nearest bridge. Up close, it looked even less stable, like sheets of glass frozen in mid-shatter across the chasm. Below, geysers of toxic gas burst randomly from the walls, their steam creating rainbow effects in the sunlight. I've done some climbing, Jack said, testing the bridge's edge with his boot. But this is something else. One wrong step, and we both fall. Vex was analyzing the geyser eruptions with her scanner. Pattern. There is pattern to steam bursts. We can time them. Her long fingers moved quickly over the device. Window of 7 seconds between bursts near bridge. Jack nodded. Okay, we stay roped together. Can't risk getting separated with our suits linked. I'll go first, test each step. You follow exactly where I step, keeping our distance close enough for the suits. They tied themselves together with emergency cable from their suits, leaving just enough slack to stay within the critical 10-meter range. Jack started across first, moving with careful precision. The crystal surface was slick, and each step had to be perfectly placed. Halfway across, the bridge creaked. Tiny cracks spread like spider webs from their footsteps. Jack froze, and Vex did the same behind him. Don't move, he whispered. When I say go, we move fast. Bridge is giving way. A geyser burst beneath them, its toxic steam swirling around their suits. The bridge trembled. More cracks appeared. Now, Jack shouted. They ran across the remaining distance, the bridge crumbling behind them with each step. The last few meters were a desperate sprint as the entire structure began to collapse. They leaped the final distance, landing hard on the other side. The bridge fell away completely, pieces of crystal tumbling into the depths with sounds like breaking glass. Their suits' proximity alarms beeped warnings. They'd almost exceeded their safe distance during the jump. That was. Vex paused, her translator searching for the right word. Too exciting. Jack actually laughed, a short sound of relief. Yeah, that's one way to put it. He checked their suit systems, everything still working, but the stress of the crossing had used up more of their resources. As they caught their breath, Vex's scanner picked up something new. Movement below, she said suddenly. In chasm walls. Many life signs. They looked over the edge, In holes and cracks along the chasm walls, they could see things moving. The geysers weren't random at all. Something was controlling them. "The whole planet's alive," Jack said quietly. "Everything here is connected somehow." "Yes," Vex agreed. "And now we crossed into new territory. Those creatures below, they know we are here." Their suits beeped again. 15 hours of shared life support remaining. Vex's ship was still far ahead, and now they knew the planet was more alive and dangerous than they'd imagined. "We keep moving," Jack said firmly. "Whatever's down there, we deal with it when we have to." Vex nodded, her alien features set in determination. They'd crossed the chasm, but both knew that the planet was just getting started with its challenges. The real test was still to come. The ground collapsed beneath their feet without warning. Jack reached for Vex instinctively as they fell, making sure their suits stayed within range. They slid down a crystal tunnel, bouncing off smooth walls until they crashed into a dimly lit cavern deep underground. "Everyone's still alive," Jack groaned, checking his suit for damage. Their shared life support systems flickered but held steady. "Alive. Not happy, but alive," Vex responded, already scanning their surroundings. She froze suddenly. "Jack, look at walls." The cavern walls weren't just crystal. They were covered in perfectly hexagonal cells, like a giant honeycomb made of translucent crystal. Each cell glowed with a faint blue light. Some cells contained what looked like eggs, while others held strange crystalline formations that pulsed with energy. "It's a hive," Vex whispered, her scientific curiosity overtaking her fear. "Entire underground network. These formations, they're power sources, energy storage." Jack was more concerned with the scratching sounds coming from the tunnels around them. "We need that energy," he said quickly. "Our suits are at 40% power after that fall." Vex nodded, moving carefully toward one of the cells. "These crystals, similar to our power cells, could recharge suits, but—" She glanced nervously at the tunnels. "Original owners might object." They heard them before they saw them. Insectoid creatures about the size of large dogs, their bodies a perfect blend of crystal and organic matter. They moved with precision through the tunnels, their crystalline legs clicking against the floor. "Don't move," Jack whispered. "They're not attacking. They're studying us." The creatures surrounded them in a perfect circle, their faceted eyes reflecting the blue glow of the cells. Vex's scanner worked frantically to analyze them. "Incredible," she breathed. "They're not just guards. They're workers. This hive, it powers something. Something big." One of the creatures stepped forward. It raised its front legs, and suddenly the air was filled with patterns of light bouncing off its crystalline body, similar to how the surface predators communicated. "It's asking why we're here," Vex said, reading her scanner's analysis. "They're intelligent." Jack thought quickly. They needed power, but fighting wasn't an option. There were too many creatures, and they were clearly organized. He remembered something from his survival training. Sometimes the best way to deal with intelligent species was to show them you could be useful. He pulled out their broken emergency beacon and held it up, letting its damaged circuits catch the light. Then he pointed to their suits' power indicators, showing how low they were. The lead creature studied them for a long moment. Then it turned to the others, creating a complex pattern of light signals. The other creatures moved away, creating a path to one of the power cells. "They understand we need help," Vex said, amazed. She moved carefully toward the cell, pulling out an adapter from her toolkit. "These crystals, with some modification." While she worked, Jack kept watch. The creatures maintained their distance, but continued observing them with obvious intelligence. He noticed how they moved in perfectly coordinated patterns, like parts of a single organism. "Got it," Vex announced. She had rigged a connection between the crystal cell and their suits. Power levels began rising immediately. But as their suits recharged, something changed. The blue glow in the cells began to pulse faster. The creatures became agitated, their light signals turning sharp and rapid. "We're disrupting something," Jack realized. "Vex, how much power do we need?" 80%. 75 minimum, she said, watching their suits charge. 60 now. 70. The crystals pulsed faster. More creatures began pouring in from other tunnels. Their light signals were becoming urgent. Now, Jack yanked the adapter free as soon as they hit 75%. The creatures were closing in, their signals now clearly warning them to leave. They found a tunnel leading up and started climbing. Behind them, they could hear the creatures following, not hunting, but escorting them out of their territory. They emerged on the surface through a different hole, far from where they'd fallen in. Their suits were charged, but they'd gained something more valuable: knowledge of what lay beneath the planet's surface. "Whole planet could be hollow," Vex said, still excited despite their close call. "Network of hives, all connected, all powering something." "Let's hope we don't have to find out what," Jack replied, checking their direction. "We've got 10 hours left to reach your ship, and I have a feeling those weren't the last surprises this planet has for us." Behind them, the hive entrance sealed itself with a crystalline barrier, erasing any sign it had ever existed. The first warning was a change in color. The orange sky turned an angry purple, and both suns disappeared behind clouds that seemed to boil with energy. Jack and Vex stood on a ridge of crystal, watching the massive storm front approach. "Never seen anything like it," Jack said, checking their suit readings. 8 hours of life support remained, and Vex's ship was still 3 hours away, if they moved fast. Vex's scanner was giving alarming readings. "Not normal storm," she said, her translator struggling with her nervous tone. "Chemical reaction in atmosphere. Acid rain coming." The wind picked up, carrying particles of crystal dust that sparkled in the dimming light. In the distance, where the storm had already hit, they could see crystal formations dissolving under the caustic rain. Our suits weren't designed for this, Jack realized. The acid rain would eat through their protective layers in minutes. He looked at Vex, whose large eyes reflected the lightning that was now crackling through the purple clouds. "How far to the next shelter?" "Too far," she replied, checking her map. "Storm moving too fast. Ship is best chance." They started running, staying close to maintain their suit connection. The storm chased them, its thunder growing louder with each passing minute. Acid rain began to fall behind them, each drop hissing as it hit the crystal ground. Jack noticed Vex was struggling to keep up. Her species wasn't built for sustained running, and the heat in her suit was rising despite their connected systems. Without warning, he scooped her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she asked, startled. "Being efficient," he grunted, maintaining his pace. "You navigate, I run. We both survive." Vex didn't argue. She held her scanner steady, calling out directions as Jack carried her through the crystal maze. "Left here. Watch formation ahead. Right at split." The acid rain caught them just as they cleared a large crystal field. The first drops hit Jack's suit with a sound like sizzling metal. Warning lights flashed inside his helmet. The suit's outer layer was beginning to deteriorate. "There." Vex pointed to a large formation ahead. Crystal density different, more resistant to acid. They took shelter under an overhang, watching as the rain dissolved smaller crystals around them. Their temporary shelter wouldn't last long. Already, the acid was eating through the crystal above them. Vex checked their suits, outer layers failing. Inner seal still good, but she didn't need to finish. Once the outer layer was gone, the inner wouldn't last long. "How far to your ship?" Jack asked, watching pieces of his suit's armor begin to bubble under the acid. 2 hours in normal conditions, Vex replied. She looked at the storm, then at their deteriorating suits. "Maybe 1 hour if we run. No stops." Jack nodded. "Then we run." He looked at her seriously. "Can you handle it?" Vex stood straighter, showing a determination that matched his own. No choice. Together or not at all. They burst from their shelter into the acid rain. Jack carried Vex again, while she held her scanner high, protecting it from the rain with her body. She guided them through the quickest route, calculating paths between the worst parts of the storm. Their suits were failing piece by piece. First the outer armor dissolved, then the middle layers began to bubble and crack. Only the innermost seal kept them alive, but even that was beginning to fail. Half hour more, Vex gasped, her voice weak from the heat building in her suit. The acid rain had destroyed part of her thermal regulation system. Jack's muscles burned, but he kept running. His military training helped him push through the pain, focusing only on putting one foot in front of the other. The ship had to be close now. A particularly strong gust of wind knocked them down. They rolled together, staying within their critical range, but losing precious seconds as acid rain pounded them. Jack pulled them both up, his suit now more holes than protection. Through the purple haze of the storm, they finally saw it. The sleek shape of Vex's crashed ship, half buried in crystal formations. But between them and the ship lay a field of dissolving crystal, crackling with chemical reactions from the acid rain. Their suits were barely functioning. Their shared life support systems were failing, and the worst of the storm was still coming. "One last run," Jack said, tightening his grip on Vex. "Ready?" Vex nodded, her scanner held close. Together, they stepped out into the storm, making their final desperate dash for survival. Jack and Vex crashed through the emergency airlock of her ship just as their suits' final layers gave way. They lay on the floor, gasping, as the ship's systems automatically sealed the entrance behind them. Outside, the acid storm raged against the reinforced hull. "Decontamination initiated," the ship's computer announced in Vex's language, then repeated in English. Jets of clean air washed over them, removing any remaining acid droplets. "We made it," Jack said weakly, helping Vex to her feet. Their damaged suits were falling apart around them. "Now let's get that beacon working." The ship's interior was tilted at an angle, with emergency lights casting red shadows everywhere. They made their way to the bridge, where Vex immediately went to work on the emergency beacon. Jack watched the acid storm through the cracked view screen, noting how the ship's hull was slowly being eaten away. "Problem," Vex said suddenly, her voice tense. "Power cells damaged in crash. Beacon has energy for one transmission only." She looked at Jack, her large eyes troubled. "Must choose, signal human ships or Meridian rescue fleet." "Not both." Jack understood the gravity of their situation. Both their peoples had rescue ships in this sector, but they could only call one. The acid storm would destroy the ship's remaining systems before a second transmission would be possible. "Signal your people," Jack said immediately. "You know this sector better, and your ships are probably closer." "No," Vex countered, surprising him. "Human ships better equipped for acid storms. Better chance of quick rescue." She started programming the beacon for human frequencies. Jack put his hand on her arm, stopping her. "Your people have better medical facilities. Your suit's been damaged longer than mine. You need treatment first." They stared at each other, both trying to save the other, neither willing to save themselves first. Around them, the ship groaned as the acid storm continued its assault on the hull. "Time running out," Vex said, checking the ship's deteriorating systems. "Hull breach in 20 minutes. Must decide." Jack looked at the beacon, then at their ruined suits, and suddenly had an idea. "Wait, your people use crystalline technology in your communications, right? Like the creatures in the hive?" Vex nodded, not seeing his point yet. "Yes. Crystal matrices for signal amplification. And human emergency beacons use radio waves, but can be modified to carry different frequencies." He grabbed their damaged suits. "What if we combine them? Use parts from both our suits to modify the beacon." Vex's eyes widened as she understood. "Create hybrid signal." Yes, possible. Difficult, but she was already taking apart her suit's communication system. "Need your beacon transmitter and crystal from my atmospheric analyzer." They worked frantically, combining their technologies in ways neither of their species had tried before. Jack's practical experience helped solve power routing problems, while Vex's scientific knowledge guided the crystal matrix modifications. Hull breach in 5 minutes, the ship's computer warned. The acid storm had eaten through the outer layers. Almost there, Vex muttered, making final adjustments. Crystal matrix aligned with human transmitter. But she looked uncertain. No way to test. Might not work at all. Hull breach in 3 minutes. Jack placed his hand on the modified beacon. Together. Vex placed her hand next to his. Together. They activated the beacon. The crystal matrix glowed bright blue as it powered up, creating patterns similar to the hive creature's communications. The human transmitter hummed, sending out its signal on multiple frequencies at once. Signal sending, the computer confirmed. Unusual pattern detected. Multiple frequencies. Increasing power. The beacon glowed brighter than it should have been able to with its limited power. The crystal matrix was somehow amplifying the signal far beyond its normal capabilities. 1 minute to hull breach. They waited tensely, watching their jury-rigged creation pulse with energy. Had it worked? Would anyone even recognize such a strange hybrid signal? The answer came with 30 seconds to spare. Multiple ships detected, the computer announced. 2 Meridian rescue vessels approaching from Sector 7. 3 human ships approaching from Sector 4. Jack and Vex looked at each other in disbelief. Their combined signal hadn't just worked. It had reached both their peoples simultaneously. 10 seconds to hull breach. Through the view screen, they saw them. The sleek shapes of Meridian ships and the sturdy bulk of human rescue vessels, all breaking through the acid storm together. For the first time in either species' history, they were working together for a common cause. As the rescue ships locked on and began extraction, Jack and Vex realized they had done more than just survive. They had shown both their peoples that the greatest achievements were possible when they worked together. The choice to save both of them had saved them both.